You shuffle awake on a damp straw mattress, one that smells like wet dog and old prayers. The stone walls around you are as cold as the truth you've been trying to ignore. A rooster screams in the distance, offended perhaps by the moral decay around him, or maybe just by the smell of last night's turnip stew. Either way, he's got a point, because here, in this sleepy medieval village tucked between gossip and goat dung, adultery isn't just frowned upon, it's a fire starter. And you? Well, your neighbour's been eyeing your spouse a bit too long and now tongues are wagging. Let's be clear, this isn't Netflix drama scandal. This is get dragged by your hair to the pillory type trouble. The Middle Ages didn't play around. Adultery, defined loosely and inconsistently depending on gender, class, and whether the bishop was in a bad mood, was considered both a sin and a social crime. For women especially, it could mean ruin. For men, depends. If you were noble and had a purse full of silver, maybe a quiet confession. If not, well, best not to get caught with your hose down. You tiptoe past the hearth where embers flicker like guilty secrets. Outside, you hear the blacksmith muttering something about that wench from the tavern again. Everyone seems to know everything about everyone here, and privacy is basically a unicorn, mythical, lovely, and utterly extinct. You pass a wooden cross, then glance up at the church tower. The bells haven't rung yet, but the judgment is already in the air. Historians still debate whether medieval punishments were more about moral correction or just entertaining the bored masses. Let's be real. Probably both. Now imagine this. You're in Cologne, mid-1200s. A local woman was accused of adultery after a merchant claimed he saw her smiling too freely at a visiting knight. No kissing? No letter? Just a smile. And yet she ended up shaved bald, tied to a stool, and pelted with rotten eggs while the town crier shouted verses from Leviticus. She didn't even like knights. That's the vibe. You reach the village square, which is already buzzing like a beehive made of shame and soup. The stocks sit quietly in the corner, waiting for their next occupant. A rough wooden sign dangles above. For the correction of vice. It swings lazily in the breeze, which smells like horses and pending doom. A friar scurries by, robes flapping like angry wings. He pauses, looks at you a moment too long, and moves on. You're not sure what he suspects, but it's probably accurate. In these times, all it takes is a whisper. Adultery isn't just about sex. It's about disorder, about breaking the unspoken pact that holds fragile lives together. Crops fail, livestock die, and people say it's because someone let the devil into their bed. And let's not pretend it's all fire and brimstone. The Middle Ages were wonderfully weird too. Did you know they used crocodile dung as contraceptive in some corners of the ancient world? Not quite medieval Europe, but still, someone, somewhere said, "You know what this situation needs? Crocodile poop." You almost admire the audacity. Anyway, back to your scandal. If you're a peasant, you'll face the soft punishments first. Public confession, a heavy fine, maybe pilgrimage. But if the church court is feeling spicy, you might be ordered to do penance in the market square, holding a candle while wearing a shirt with your crime written on it, in Latin, because humiliation is better when no one understands it fully. You watch as a woman in her 50s is led to the stocks. Her face is stone, her eyes unblinking. A man follows behind, her husband presumably red with rage or shame or both. A priest announces her offense. Carmen, accused of adultery with a stable hand, confessed under pressure, mercy requested. You notice no mention of the stable hand. She's locked in with a clunk, and children throw cabbage at her feet. You can't look away. The village pretends this is justice, but really, it's just theatre with extra sweat. Some historians argue that these punishments weren't purely about control, they were about making the body a billboard for virtue. You sinned with your body, so now your body will pay the price. Others say it was less about morality and more about reinforcing property lines, because in medieval minds, a wife was kind of like a field. If someone else ploughed it, it wasn't just rude, it was theft. You wonder what would happen if it were you. Probably nothing good. You think of slipping away into the woods, maybe joining a monastery or pretending to be mute. That worked for a baker's son once. He faked a vow of silence for 20 years to avoid admitting he'd gotten the miller's daughter pregnant. You shake your head. The sun is climbing, and the stocks creak as Carmen shifts uncomfortably. Somewhere, a dog barks, and you wonder if he's judging you too. You breathe in the scent of firewood and fermented judgment and head home. For now, the stones have missed you, but the day is long and secrets don't stay buried forever. The next morning arrives with a whimper, not a bang. You stretch under a scratchy wool blanket that smells faintly of mildew and disappointment. Outside, the air is brisk enough to sting your nose, but not cold enough to kill the rumors blooming like mold on old cheese. News travels fast in a medieval village, faster than carts, faster than the plague, faster even than whatever fever dream your neighbor Merrick has about his sheep being stolen by witches. You shuffle into the square again, trying to appear casual, normal, innocent, which ironically is the least suspicious look in existence. But the crowd gathered near the church steps doesn't care much for subtlety. They're there for one thing: a good old-fashioned dose of public humiliation. Today's main act, a man named Aldrich, who, unfortunately for him, couldn't keep his tunic on and was discovered, pants firmly down, in the hayloft of his neighbor's barn, accompanied by a woman who definitely wasn't his wife, and most definitely was his wife's cousin. Oops. And so Aldrich becomes the living embodiment of the cuckold's shame. You spot him now standing stiffly as two parish officials fit an absurd pair of large wooden antlers to his head. The symbolism isn't subtle. In fact, it's so painfully obvious it could qualify as slapstick comedy. These horns, cuckold horns, are meant to mark him as the fool, the man whose household has been invaded, whose honor is in tatters. But here's the twist. He was the one cheating. Why the horns then, you mutter, eyebrows raised. Well, it turns out the horns weren't just for wronged husbands. Sometimes, depending on local tradition and who got caught first, anyone tangled in the net of infidelity could wear them. It was about mockery, about stripping someone down to an object of ridicule. Your dignity dissolves the moment people point and laugh. And laugh they do. Children, villagers, even the priest's apprentice snorts into his sleeve. Aldrich is made to ride a donkey backward through the square. His feet dangle off the sides like sad turnips. Behind him, someone bangs a pot lid rhythmically, chanting, "Aldrich loves the hay but not the plough." Medieval comedy, folks, low effort, high shame. The tradition of the backward donkey ride, by the way, was not unique to this village. It popped up all over Europe in various forms, from Italy to the Low Countries. It was one of those cultural exports with broad appeal, like flatbread or blaming women for everything. You can't help but wince for Aldrich. Sure, he made some poor choices, but now he's going to be known as Hayloft Harry for the rest of his life. Maybe longer. In these parts, your grandchildren inherit your gossip. As the procession passes, you hear a pair of elderly women muttering. "She caught him with her own eyes," one says. "Blessed be those eyes," the other nods solemnly. You nod too, mostly to blend in. There's a strange sort of pleasure people get from this ritual, the shared spectacle. It's like their own sins are washed a little cleaner each time someone else's are put on public display. One historian described medieval justice as a mirror turned outward, where society punished the things it feared in itself. And in case you were wondering, yes, some women also rode the donkey. But they usually got extras, like carrying symbolic objects, brooms, wooden phalluses, or signs proclaiming their sin, and in some regions their hair was cut off. Hair, in case you haven't had your coffee yet, was a big deal back then. It was tied to virtue and femininity. You lose your hair, you lose your social standing, your looks, your marriage prospects. You become someone that dogs bark at. You rub your own scalp, suddenly aware of how valuable a simple ponytail might be. And here's the uncomfortable part, because there's always one. These punishments were often gendered and disproportionate. A man might get a chuckle and some rotten tomatoes. A woman? She might get her nose cut off. Yes, really. In parts of medieval England and the Holy Roman Empire, mutilation was not off the table, especially for lower-class women with no powerful relatives to cry foul. Historians still debate whether these punishments reflected widespread practice or just scattered, overzealous interpretations of law. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, as it usually is, between the law books and the mud. But not all was doom and donkey rides. Occasionally, these punishments backfired. There's a record from 1372 of a man in Bruges who requested to wear the horns in public every Sunday, claiming it brought him attention from wealthy women. He became a minor celebrity. Eventually, he opened a tavern called the Horned Rooster. People are strange, and that hasn't changed in 700 years. You glance back at Aldrich, who's now being pelted with stale bread rolls, much softer than yesterday's cabbage, at least. His antlers have tilted awkwardly to one side, and a goose is chasing his donkey in slow, determined rage. It's almost art. You let your gaze drift up toward the cathedral spire. High above the mess, a lone bell tolls once. It's a somber sound that echoes across the rooftops, reminding you that while today's laughter might fade, the stain of scandal clings like wet wool. And still, there's part of you that wonders, what if no one had told? What if the hayloft stayed a secret? Because, in the end, this wasn't just punishment, it was theatre. A show of moral control wrapped in a carnival of embarrassment. And like all good theatre, the audience gets the last laugh. You turn toward home, ears full of laughter and footsteps, heart just a little heavier. The donkey brays behind you, horns bobbing in the dusk. You keep your head down the next morning, eyes fixed on the worn cobblestones as if they might offer answers. They don't. They offer a lot of chicken droppings, though, which is honestly more typical of life here. You pass by the chapel, and the scent of incense hits you like a holy brick, heavy, floral, and ever so slightly desperate. Today is confession day. You slip into the wooden pew like a guilty shadow. The church is dark, too dark for this hour, but the flickering candles give everything that faint orange glow that says divine judgment with a touch of mystery. You aren't here because you did anything. Not technically, you're here because everyone's watching, and not being seen in church would be suspicious. You breathe in, trying not to cough on the smoke curling from the altar. Someone next to you whispers a prayer. You whisper a question, what happens if I get caught? The answer comes quickly. You hear footsteps on the marble floor, soft, deliberate, cloaked in authority. Father Theobald, the parish priest, approaches the pulpit. His beard is uneven like a sheep that lost a bet. His eyes, though, are sharp. He clears his throat and the sermon begins. Adultery, he says, with the gravity of a man naming a plague, is the rot beneath the painted wall, the rat chewing at the grain, the serpent in the marriage bed. So subtle, right? You slide down an inch in your seat. Father Theobald goes on, describing the dangers of temptation in a tone that sounds deeply personal. Let not a single thought stray from the vows given before God, he intones, lest punishment find both flesh and spirit. Someone in the back coughs. You'd bet your week's barley that it's Aldrich. Here's the thing. In medieval Europe, adultery wasn't just a personal failing, it was a legal one. Church and state were all tangled up like an uncombed wig. Secular courts dealt with property and violence. But sins of the flesh? That was church territory. And the church had a playbook that read like a mashup of courtroom drama and medieval fan fiction. Penances could vary, of course. Sometimes, if you confessed early, they'd let you off with a pilgrimage, a real one, not a weekend stroll. We're talking weeks or months on the road, often barefoot, sometimes in chains. The goal was suffering, reflection, repentance, or, sore feet and frostbite. But if you didn't confess, if you got caught,
that's when things got spicy.
You're yanked from your daydream as Father Theobald slams his palm on the pulpit. And to those who think their sins remain hidden, know this: God sees in darkness, and so does your neighbor.
There it is.
You glance sideways. Everyone's peeking at everyone else. The baker's wife, the cobbler, even old Martha, whose ears don't work, but whose eyes miss nothing. One man leans forward like he's about to blurt something out, but then nothing. Silence. And then Father Theobald says the words you've been dreading. Let the accused step forward. Your stomach flips. It's not you this time, but your body reacts anyway. The bench creaks. A woman stands, young, pretty. Her veil is trembling. She walks up the aisle slowly, each step scraping eternity across the stone floor. Whispers trail behind her like smoke. Her name is Beatrix, and you know her. Everyone does. Sweet voice. Helps the herbalist. Makes cakes that actually taste like food. She once gave you time for a toothache. Now she stands alone in front of everyone as Father Theobald reads from a scroll. Beatrix, daughter of Elder, accused of lying with a man not her husband. The man unnamed. The sin unrepented.
No donkey, no cabbage. This is the church's turn, and they're not into slapstick.
Instead, Beatrix is told to kneel. She does. A heavy silence falls. Then comes the penance. 2 weeks fasting on bread and water, prayers at sunrise and dusk, public confession 3 days running, and, here's the kicker, a barefoot walk to the shrine at the edge of the forest.
Rain or shine, no cloak, no shoes. It's not branding, it's not blood, but it's its own kind of cruel.
And here's the funny part. Beatrix might not even be guilty. It's whispered that her father's in debt to a merchant, that the accusation is payment of a different kind. Historians still debate whether these kinds of confessions were always voluntary, or if social pressure and political convenience played a bigger role than Scripture ever did. You watch as Beatrix is led to the altar. Her eyes are glassy. She doesn't cry, not yet, but her hands shake as she places them on the stone and whispers her mea culpa.
And still you wonder, who gains from this?
The church, certainly. It reaffirms power. The merchant, maybe. The neighbors? Oh, absolutely. They get a front row seat to someone else's ruin. But what about Beatrix? You exit the church as quietly as you entered. Outside, the sky is heavy with the smell of coming rain. You spot Beatrix's mother near the steps, face pale, lips tight. You nod to her. She does not nod back. You make your way toward the edge of the village, passing a group of children balancing on a wall. One of them sings a rhyme, something about a girl and a priest and a field of nettles. It's probably about Beatrix. It will be about you one day, if you're not careful. You pause by the shrine at the crossroads. Just a stone and some wildflowers, but it sees a lot of feet, a lot of guilt. You place a coin on the stone, just in case. Above you, the clouds finally break. Not in thunder, not in violence. Just slow, steady rain.
Like tears someone else has already cried.
You wake to the sound of bells, low, solemn, not quite church sermon serious, but close. These are the bells of judgment, and they toll not for the dead, but for the uncertain. Today is ordeal day. You stretch under your blanket of burlap and regret, already dreading what you know is coming: heat, fire, and an audience with too much time and too little mercy. You shuffle out into the fog-choked morning like a reluctant ghost. Everything's damp. The sky sulks overhead. The mud grabs your boots like it's trying to keep you from going where you're going. A few villagers pass by, whispering as they go. You pretend not to hear them, but you do. You always do. At the village square, a pit has been cleared and filled with coals. Nearby, resting on a slab of stone like some sacred relic, lies a thick iron rod, dark with age, crusted with old soot, and ready to ruin someone's week. Today, someone will undergo trial by ordeal, not the fun kind, not even the logical kind. No, this is trial by hot iron, a test of innocence straight out of what can only be described as the church's "let's see what happens" era. You find a spot near the edge of the crowd. People are gathering, murmuring. A couple of children are playing at imitation nearby. One picks up a stick, the other pretends to scream. Comforting. Here's how it works. The accused must carry a red-hot iron bar for a few paces. If their hand heals cleanly in 3 days, innocent. If it festers or blisters, guilty. Yes, really. This was a thing. Clergy oversaw it. Whole communities watched. God was the ultimate judge, and apparently he had a real thing for dermatology. The crowd parts and a woman named Isolde steps forward. You've seen her before, quiet, polite, always fixing her headscarf. She's accused of sleeping with a knight who passed through town last month. No one saw it, of course, but her belly's growing rounder and her husband's been gone for 2 years. So, math. She stands still as the priest murmurs a prayer. 2 young boys fan the coals. One of them stifles a grin. The rod glows red now, and your stomach does a little flip, like it's trying to find the nearest exit. A deacon lifts the bar with a pair of blacksmith tongs. He holds it aloft reverently, as if it's the Holy Grail and not a farm tool from hell. Then he turns to Isolde. She does not move.
Not right away.
Then she reaches out with trembling fingers and takes the iron into her bare hands. For a second, maybe 2, there is silence. Then comes the sound, a kind of wet hiss, like rain on a griddle. Then a muffled gasp, not from Isolde, but from the crowd. She takes the 3 steps required. Each one is heavy, deliberate, like she's walking into history or into a very bad dream. When she places the bar back onto the stone, her hands are already blistering, flesh darkening. The priest steps in quickly and wraps them in linen. He mumbles another prayer. "We will know her innocence in 3 days' time," he says. You doubt it will take that long. Historians still debate whether these ordeals were really meant to determine guilt or just scare everyone else into good behavior. Some suggest the priests would rig the ordeal, cool the iron slightly or bandage the hands in secret to protect someone they thought was innocent. Others argue that belief was so strong, people thought divine intervention could actually heal wounds overnight. Either way, science had not been invited to this particular party. As Isolde is led away, shaking, the priest turns to the crowd and raises his hands. "Let this be a lesson to all." You notice no one nods, they just look down at their own hands. You stay behind as the villagers trickle away. The coals are cooling now, but still glow faintly like the embers of shame. You glance at the rod again, imagining its weight, its heat, what it might feel like to carry it, what it might mean to do so with the truth behind you or in front of you, or tangled somewhere in between. A merchant sidles up next to you, chewing something unidentifiable. "I heard the knight gave her a pendant," he mutters. "Gold, with a lion on it. Is that proof?" you ask. he shrugs. It's shiny, that's something. You both stand there in silence for a while, watching smoke rise into the grey sky. Did you know, by the way, that medieval monks believed basil only grew well if you cursed at it while planting? They thought it needed a little verbal abuse to thrive, which makes you wonder, maybe people believed punishment brought out the truth in the same way. Bruise something just enough and maybe honesty will bloom. You walk away from the pit, toward the edge of the village where the wild herbs grow. Somewhere behind you, the iron bar still smoulders. Ahead, a new rumour is already sprouting. Something about the Reeves' daughter and a peddler of ribbons. You don't catch the whole thing, just fragments, but you know how this ends. If it reaches the church, someone's going to get burned. You don't wake up so much as you give up on sleep. The night had been full of distant whispers, the kind that make the hairs on your arms stand up like soldiers. You kept rolling over, trying to ignore the thoughts that kept buzzing in your head like mosquitoes of moral panic. Now, as dawn bleeds into the village like weak broth, you find yourself walking, again, toward the square. This time, there's no fire, no donkey, no hot iron. Today's punishment is quieter, more theatrical. You arrive to find a rope barrier encircling the centre of town. People mill around, clucking softly, a few adjusting their hoods like they're settling in for a folk drama. In the centre, a wooden platform has been erected overnight. It's got that temporary look to it, hastily hammered together, a little wobbly, and probably cursed. A man stands atop it, holding a long beeswax candle nearly the size of his own arm. His clothes are threadbare and grey, meant to resemble penitent sackcloth. His bare feet curl slightly on the cold wood. Mud cakes his hem, and his head is bowed as if he's afraid of eye contact, or knows he won't like what he sees when he makes it. This is the walk of penance. You step closer, quietly taking a place near the front of the growing crowd. A child beside you whispers, "Is he the one who kissed the cooper's wife?" And the mother hushes him immediately. But everyone knows it's true. The cooper had a knife collection and no sense of humour. Things could have gone worse. Instead of knives, the church opted for ceremony. The man's name is Bertram. You've seen him before, hawking pig fat as healing balm at market. It didn't work, but he told good jokes. That won't help him now. A friar appears, stepping beside Bertram with a scroll. You expect thunder, brimstone, maybe a verbal flaying. But instead, the friar's voice is soft, gentle. Like he's narrating bedtime for a particularly unruly child. Bertram, son of Elias, he begins, confesses his sin before God and the eyes of this good town, that he did commit adultery with the wife of the cooper in the hayshed during Lent, no less. There's a rustle of scandalized gasps, and someone mutters, "During Lent?" as though the timing was more offensive than the act itself. The friar continues, "He shall walk the road to the chapel barefoot, bearing the candle of repentance. Let him be seen, let him be forgiven." A bell chimes softly, and Bertram steps down from the platform. The walk begins. It's slow, deliberate, a humble procession of one, with the friar a few paces behind and half the village trailing like a judgmental parade.
You walk too, you can't help it. Something about the silence, the candle, the mud squelching underfoot, pulls you in. It's like watching grief move through a body. There's no screaming, no blood. Just this man, holding wax and shame, while his feet turn red from the cold stones.
Now here's something you didn't expect. You feel sorry for him. Because no matter what he did, no matter how many haysheds or fasting seasons were involved, there's something undeniably human in his slumped shoulders. Like maybe this punishment isn't just about cleansing his soul, it's about giving everyone else a little taste of power. Historians still debate whether these walks were meant as sincere redemption or public theatre. Some say it was for the soul, others say it was just spectacle with a crucifix. Most agree it was somewhere in between. You? You're not so sure anymore. There's a turn in the path now leading toward the chapel. Bertram hesitates for a second, then keeps going. The candle is melting fast, wax trickling over his knuckles. A dog barks in the distance. Someone coughs dramatically. And then, like magic, he sings.
Not loudly, not beautifully, just a soft, trembling chant, something Latin and sad. And suddenly the whole thing changes. Now he's not a man being punished. He's a character in a play, a sinner finding his spotlight.
A few villagers stop walking. The friar blinks, clearly not expecting it. But Bertram just keeps singing, face pale and uplifted, eyes closed like he's somewhere else entirely. Maybe he is. Maybe he's back in the hayshed, laughing. Maybe he's imagining himself forgiven. You walk the last stretch in silence. When he reaches the chapel steps, he kneels, places the candle down and kisses the stone. No one applauds. That's not how this ends. The friar steps forward, places a hand on his shoulder and says something you can't hear. Then Bertram is led inside. The crowd begins to disperse. You stay a moment longer, staring at the puddle of wax still steaming on the chapel step. A woman beside you murmurs, "At least he got to keep his clothes." She's not wrong. The walk of shame was kinder than the whip, or the mask, or the iron rod. But still, it leaves marks. They just happen to be invisible. Did you know, by the way, that in parts of medieval Germany, adulterers were made to wear chicken feathers glued to their clothes? Chicken feathers. Imagine trying to confess your sins while looking like a molting goose. You start walking back home, boots squelching, thoughts heavier than your satchel. You pass the cooper's shop. He's chopping wood, face unreadable. He doesn't look up. You keep walking. No one speaks to you, but they look. They always look. Because forgiveness might be divine, but forgetting, that's painfully human. You're halfway through your breakfast, something grey that claims to be porridge, when you hear the clang of iron on iron. It's not blacksmith noise. It's too hollow, too sharp. It's the sound of punishment with flair. You toss aside your bowl and follow the noise like a bloodhound trailing scandal. Down the alley, past the tavern, across the bakery where the loaves today are shaped suspiciously like horns. Cheeky baker. Until you arrive at the square. There she is. Not tied down, not shackled, just standing, upright, motionless, in the center of a small circle of gawking villagers. Her name is Margareta. She's wearing what looks like a metal helmet from someone's fever dream. The front is shaped into a crude snout like a pig, and the mouth is forced open with a long iron tongue sticking out. It's called a shame mask, and if it looks ridiculous, that's the point. Shame masks were all the rage in certain medieval cities. Part humiliation device, part torture tool, part community theatre. They came in many forms, some with donkey ears, others with lolling tongues, even a few with devil horns. But all of them shared one thing, the goal of turning you into a walking billboard of disgrace. Margareta's mask rattles as she breathes. It's not strapped on tightly, yet. A man, probably the local constable, is fiddling with leather fastenings behind her head, muttering about rust and last week's scold who drooled too much. The crowd doesn't laugh this time. The mask is too creepy, too real. And this isn't just about adultery anymore. It's about talking about adultery, because Margareta, as it turns out, wasn't caught in any compromising position. She was caught talking about someone who was, the mayor's daughter to be exact. So, naturally, Margareta is now being punished as a scold. A woman who spreads rumors, sharpens words like knives, and basically has the gall to narrate real life out loud. Shocking behavior.
Loose lips, the friar mutters nearby. Sink souls.
You're not sure that's how the phrase goes, but fine. The mask is fully in place now. Margareta tries to adjust her shoulders to appear indifferent, but it's hard to be cool when you've got a metal pig face riveted to your skull. A child stifles a giggle. Her eyes dart over to the crowd, searching. What? For sympathy? Familiarity? Escape? You lock eyes with her for just a second, and you see it. The pure, distilled hatred of someone who was not expecting to be punished for words. Historians still debate whether shame masks were widely used or just sensational stories passed around like medieval memes. Some argue that they were primarily symbolic, used rarely, with lots of local variants. Others think they were more common than we assume, especially in regions where public order meant controlling women's voices.
And let's be honest, the design effort is impressive. Someone crafted that pig snout with care. Someone said, you know what this woman needs? A tongue that sticks out this far.
You circle closer, pretending to inspect the produce at a nearby stall. The smell of onions and iron mingles in the air. Margareta is now being led, slowly, around the market square. Not fast, not angry, just a slow, shameful loop, like she's a very unpopular parade float. People step back to give her space. No one touches her, but no one steps in either. Because the point of the shame mask isn't to punish the body, it's to fracture the soul, to say, you are not welcome in polite society. Not today, maybe not ever. You wonder what exactly she said. Was it true? Was it whispered or shouted? Was it said in anger, in jest?
No one knows, no one cares.
Because punishment isn't about truth, it's about control. You glance up at the cathedral tower. The bell hasn't rung. Maybe it won't. Not for this. Did you know that in 14th century Scotland scolds were sometimes ducked in water instead of masked? They'd be tied to a cucking stool and dunked repeatedly into rivers, ponds, or troughs, presumably until their words washed away. It's where we get the phrase cuckold's corner, which somehow sounds both funny and tragic. Margareta makes her second loop. Someone has drawn a crude tail on the back of her dress. The friar doesn't stop it. No one does.
But you quietly step behind a stall, grab a scarf from your pocket, and toss it gently to where she'll walk. She sees it, stumbles, pauses just for a moment, and then keeps going.
Maybe later she'll remember it wasn't everyone who laughed. As she vanishes behind the baker's wall, the crowd begins to thin. The shame lingers, though, like the scent of smoked meat on old cloth. You hear someone say, next time, maybe she'll learn to keep her tongue still. You say nothing. But inside, you wonder who's really safer, the ones who speak or the ones who stay silent. Because in the medieval world, silence isn't innocence, it's just strategy. You wake with the faintest sense that something is about to go terribly, hilariously wrong. Not dangerously wrong, just enough to make the day weird and possibly involve someone getting stuck in a barrel. You're not far off. The town is buzzing before the sun even finishes rising. Word spreads fast in small places, especially when it involves nuns, monks, and something that may or may not be a love letter sealed with beeswax and shaped like a heart. You follow the current of curious villagers down the hill toward the priory, a squat, ivy-choked building that smells of parchment, candle soot, and the faint, unrelenting odor of boiled beets. You don't usually come here, most people don't, unless they've sinned spectacularly or they're dying. But today is Scandal Day. Inside the courtyard, 2 monks and a nun stand awkwardly in front of the prior, who looks like he aged 20 years since yesterday. In his hands is the letter, the one they found hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of St. Augustine's Confessions of all things. Irony is alive and well, thank you very much. My dearest bird of morning light, the prior reads aloud in a strained voice as the crowd leans in. Your eyes are holier to me than relics, your lips more sacred than the altar.
A woman gasps behind you. Someone drops a bucket.
The nun stares straight ahead, eyes vacant, like she's transcended this moment and now lives full-time in a cloud of denial. The monk, Brother Oswin, is sweating profusely. Not out of guilt, mind you, out of fear, and maybe a little confusion because he apparently didn't write the letter. It was meant for him, from her, from Sister Albruna. And here's the kicker, they never even touched each other. No hayloft rendezvous, no secret garden meetings, just words, carefully chosen, lovingly inked, sealed and smuggled like contraband emotions. But this is the Middle Ages, and letters carry weight, especially if they imply things like affection, carnal desire, or meeting after Vespers. So now the church must respond. The prior paces. Though no physical sin is confessed, he mutters, the intent, the thought alone, wounds the soul. This is true-ish. According to canon law at the time, even the intention to sin could be treated as sin itself, like spiritual pre-crime. Adultery of the heart, some called it. Makes you wonder how many people were walking around condemned just for a vivid imagination. Historians still debate how strictly vows of chastity were enforced across medieval Europe. In reality, enforcement depended on who was watching, how wealthy your abbey was, and whether you annoyed the bishop. But when love letters showed up, that was hard to ignore. Sister Albruna finally speaks. Her voice is calm, eerily calm. I regret my words only because you have read them without understanding.
A few people blink. One old man whistles quietly through missing teeth. Somewhere a goose honks in solidarity.
The prior looks as if he might burst into flames, but instead he folds the letter slowly, tucks it into a pouch and declares, "This matter shall be resolved with repentance and a return to silence." That could mean anything. And in this case it means confinement. Sister Albruna is escorted to the small stone chamber off the garden, where she'll spend the next 40 days in contemplative silence. 40 days. No writing, no speaking, no letters. Just her, her thoughts, and the rats who probably have better love lives. Brother Oswin, meanwhile, is assigned to dig latrines for a month. Not because he sinned, but because someone must suffer visibly, or else the punishment doesn't stick. You wander back out with the rest of the villagers, still stunned. Do you think she really loved him? Someone asks beside you. You shrug. I think she wrote it down. That's close enough. Because love, in the Middle Ages, didn't need physical touch to become a punishable offense. Sometimes the fantasy was the crime. And sometimes the punishment wasn't pain, it was isolation. Just long enough to kill the story. Did you know that in the 12th century, a French abbey had to rebuild its scriptorium because the nuns kept writing poems to one another in the margins of religious texts? They were good too, sapphic longing in beautiful Latin. The abbot burned the books, but the ashes still knew what had been written. You pass the garden wall and catch a glimpse of Sister Albruna through the window slit. She's sitting cross-legged, chin lifted slightly, lips moving as if mouthing a memory. You hope she remembers every word of that letter, not because it was sinful, but because it was hers. You're barely halfway through your morning loaf when the blacksmith's apprentice dashes past the bakery shouting, "She's got the bridle on," with the kind of glee usually reserved for harvest feasts or mildly catastrophic weather. You follow, obviously. Not because you're nosy, though you are, but because few things draw a medieval crowd faster than iron, scandal, and someone getting what they deserve. Air quotes, very much implied. By the time you reach the square, a circle has already formed. Not a tight one. This isn't a stoning after all, but a comfortable ring of curiosity. Gossip always appreciates a little elbow room. At the center is a woman you know, Else. Widow, brewer, loud. Too loud, if you ask some people. She's spent the better part of the year calling out the merchant who shorted her on hops, the priest who eyed her daughter, and anyone else who dared question her memory or measurements. And now, after allegedly accusing 2 married men of improper fondling, she's been given the scold's bridle, which, if you're not familiar, is like a shame mask's crueler, more literal cousin. The thing is a cage for the head, metal bands that clamp around the skull with a flat piece of iron shoved into the mouth. It holds the tongue down. Some even have spikes. This one does. Else is trying to breathe through her nose. Her arms are bound, but her eyes flash with more fury than a tavern brawl on discount ale night. "Did you hear what she said to the Reeves' wife?" someone whispers beside you.
"No," the other replies eagerly. "Exactly, that's why she's in it."
You sigh. It's not that Elsie is innocent. She did speak out, loudly, frequently, but whether her words were false or just inconvenient is harder to say. Truth doesn't always win here. Volume does. A friar steps forward to explain the punishment to the crowd. "She has loosed her tongue too freely," he says, "and what cannot be kept by discipline must be held by iron." You imagine a medieval TED Talk with that title. Coming up next, Brother Gregory on why iron is the new repentance. The bridle clinks as Elsa shifts. Her face is red. You can't tell if it's from anger or lack of airflow. Probably both. She's made to walk slowly around the market square, guided by 2 constables. Her boots scuff along the cobblestones. Children gape. One of them laughs until his mother smacks the back of his head with the tenderness of medieval parenting. The bridle isn't new, nor rare. Women across Europe were subjected to it for all manner of offences: gossip, accusations, complaints, excessive talking, whatever that means. Some towns used them as deterrents, others as entertainment. In one 17th century Scottish town, records show a woman was bridled for calling the baker's wife a flour thief. Harsh? Sure. But apparently the flour really was missing. Historians still debate how common the practice was. Was it truly widespread, or just a few bad apples writing things down more than others? It's unclear. What is clear is how effective it was at sending a message. Speak and bleed.
And the worst part?
It worked. You glance at the villagers, mostly women, watching in silence. Some shake their heads. Others whisper. But no one protests. Because they know. They know how easy it is to end up in iron for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong man with the wrong kind of power. You shift uncomfortably. Your own tongue feels heavy just watching hers be pinned. After the walk, Elsa is made to stand in the center of the square while the friar reads scripture about humility and bridled tempers. You catch only fragments. A wife should be silent.
The tongue is a fire. Better to dwell on a rooftop.
You want to roll your eyes, but instead you look at Elsa. Her eyes are still burning. Not broken. Just restrained. She holds your gaze for a second. It's not a plea, it's a challenge. You nod just barely. It's the least and the most you can do. Did you know, by the way, that in some regions, women forced into bridles had to wear them again the next market day, just to reinforce the lesson? Like a sequel no one asked for. Medieval justice loved a callback.
Eventually the bridle is unlocked. It takes effort. It's not built for comfort or speed. Else coughs as it comes off, mouth sticky with blood and pride.
The friar declares her penance fulfilled. She does not thank him. She does not speak. She simply walks away. You don't follow, but you do watch every step she takes, head high, stride steady. She's not walking like someone who's been punished. She's walking like someone who knows this won't be the last time.
And maybe next time she'll have an audience of her own.
The day begins like any other, with the smell of boiled onions and the sound of someone being loudly disappointed in a goat. You're halfway through your chores, trying to pretend your laundry pile doesn't resemble a siege mound, when you hear a phrase that makes your stomach flip. They're branding her. You drop the tunic. You don't even pretend to fold it. Because branding means serious business. This isn't shame masks or gossip bridles. This is fire meeting flesh. And it's happening in Paris, or more precisely, the part of Paris where the poor live, the priests preach louder, and justice wears fancier robes. You elbow your way through the alleys until you reach the square just beyond the old fountain, the one with the angel statue that always looks mildly offended. There's already a crowd, thick as stew and twice as hot. Everyone is facing the raised wooden platform at the centre. And there she is, Isabeau,
A seamstress, widowed, not particularly chatty, not particularly flirtatious, which makes today's event all the more jarring.
A herald reads from a scroll. Found guilty of carnal betrayal of the marital bed with a man not her husband. Sentence. Branding upon the shoulder with the fleur-de-lis, the mark of infamy. Not a word about the man, of course. That would be silly. Who brands a merchant? You glance at Isabeau. Her face is pale, but not tear-streaked. Her arms are bound to the post, her blouse pulled down to expose her shoulder. The crowd watches, equal parts hungry and horrified. Now here's something people forget about branding. It's slow. The iron must be heated until it glows, not just red, but white-hot. And even then, it cools fast. So they have to work quickly, or just redo it. The executioner, a man whose eyebrows seem permanently singed, lifts the brand from the coals. The fleur-de-lis, a symbol of French royalty, purity, and now public disgrace, shimmers menacingly. Isabeau doesn't flinch, yet. The iron presses into her skin with a sizzle that hits the square like thunder in a confessional. The smell, burnt meat, scorched linen, and something strangely sweet makes a few people in the crowd gag. One girl faints theatrically into a barrel of apples. Isabeau bites her lip, hard, blood beads, but no scream. They pull the iron away and the mark is there, raw, red, angry. It won't be pretty. It won't fade. And that's the point. Branding was considered one of the cleaner punishments in France. It left a message. It saved on resources, and most importantly, it stuck for life. Historians still debate whether branding was more common in France than elsewhere, or simply more organized. Some believe it was tied to property laws and the rise of civic identity, marking someone not just as guilty, but as permanently other. Like tagging a sheep, but with fire. You feel a twist in your stomach as Isabeau is untied. She staggers slightly, supported by two silent women who cover her with a shawl and walk her off the platform. No applause, no jeers. Just silence, like the end of a play no one enjoyed. Shouldn't have let him in, someone mutters near you. You want to say something clever, something about double standards or how the man probably left with clean hands and a clean name, but you don't, because you're still watching her. She walks with a slight limp now, one arm pressed protectively to her shoulder. She vanishes down a narrow lane, into the shadows. The crowd begins to scatter like nothing happened, because for them, nothing did. A sinner was punished, justice was seen, order was restored. But you know better. You know branding isn't just physical, it's social. It burns through fabric, through names, through futures. The mark will keep her from remarrying, from working in certain shops, from ever being seen as respectable.
It doesn't matter what the truth was. It only matters what the iron says.
Did you know, by the way, that in early medieval England, convicted adulterers could be branded on the forehead, just in case you thought hiding the shame under a shawl was too easy? But the French, ever fashionable, preferred the shoulder. Subtle, elegant, cruel. You finally turn to leave, but you catch sight of the executioner cooling the brand in a bucket of water. He does it carefully, with the tenderness of someone cleaning a favorite tool. You wonder how many women he's marked, how many didn't flinch, how many never came back to the market. You walk home slower than usual, eyes on the cobblestones. They're warm underfoot, the way things get after too much sun, or after iron. When you pass your doorstep, you hesitate. You look at your own shoulder, covered by layers of cloth and habit. No marks. Not yet. Part 10. There's a different feel in the air today. Less iron, more incense. Less shouting, more weeping. You follow the sound of chimes, not bells this time, but little hand-held ones, the kind acolytes swing gently during processions. At first, you think it's a funeral. It isn't.
It's forgiveness.
Which, depending on who's asking, might be even heavier. You reach the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, just as the sun slices through the fog, catching the water with that soft, golden shimmer that makes even judgment look like a painting. A small crowd has gathered beneath a second-floor balcony, the kind built for lovers or speeches, or, in this case, public pleas for mercy. This isn't a punishment you've seen before. It's older, more theatrical, a kind of social drama local to certain Italian cities where those accused of adultery, particularly women, could save themselves from punishment by confessing publicly beneath the window of the local magistrate or priest. If you cried, if you begged, if you looked pitiful enough to move hearts hardened by duty and fish taxes, you might walk away without chains or scars. Mirella stands in the square below. She's young, but today she looks ancient. Her dress is modest, her hair loose around her shoulders, a deliberate touch. Unbound hair meant unbound shame. Everyone here knows the signs. Above her, the balcony door creaks open. A bishop leans out, flanked by two deacons, and, bizarrely, a cat that seems completely disinterested in the legal fate of Mirella's soul. Mirella begins to speak. Her voice is thin, not because she's weak, but because volume isn't the point here. It's the quiver, the wetness in the eye. This is theatre, and she's giving the performance of a lifetime. "I have betrayed my vows," she says, her voice floating up to the balcony like incense. "Not only those I spoke at the altar, but those I whispered in secret to the man I once called husband." You glance at the crowd. They are spellbound. Even the butcher's apprentice, who once yawned during an actual execution, is riveted.
"I was lonely," Mirella continues. "I was seen by another, and I let myself be seen. I forgot who I was and what was promised. And for this, I ask mercy. From the law, from the heavens, from him."
She kneels, and that's when it happens.
A second door opens, not the one on the balcony, but a side door near the magistrate's steps. A man appears.
Her husband. He doesn't speak at first, just stands there, arms crossed, face unreadable. This could go either way. And if this were a tavern story, he'd forgive her instantly. They'd embrace, and there'd be a rain of rose petals from the heavens. But this isn't a tavern story. It's Florence, and Florence is subtle. He walks forward slowly, the crowd parting. He doesn't look at Mirella until he's 2 steps away. Then softly, "Is it true that you forgot me? Or that you remembered yourself?" A murmur ripples. This man reads poetry, clearly. She says nothing, just lowers her eyes. The bishop leans over the balcony. "If you forgive her," he says, "there shall be no charge, no fine, no branding." A long pause. Then, with the kind of dramatic pause usually reserved for actors or saints, the husband kneels beside her. "She was mine, but she is hers now." Now that confuses people. The bishop blinks. "I beg your meaning?" "I release her," the man says. "From me, from this. She may live, she may love, she may leave." Silence.
Even the cat seems surprised.
Historians still debate whether such public acts of mercy were common or rare bits of performative grace meant to impress certain onlookers or political patrons. Some suggest these forgiveness rituals were more about reasserting male control. "Look how powerful I am, I can choose to pardon her." while others argue they offered one of the few ways women could avoid brutal penalties. You watch Morella as she stands. The crowd doesn't cheer. This isn't that kind of story. But they step back. They make room. She walks away slowly, her husband still on his knees, his head bowed. It's unclear who's been punished or who's free. You linger after the square empties, watching the balcony doors swing gently in the breeze. Did you know that in 14th century Venice, some women could pay scribes to write public apologies for them? Scripts to memorize, weep through, and deliver beneath similar balconies? It was part confession, part performance, and part survival strategy. Good tears were worth more than gold. You wonder if Morella practiced hers. You walk home thinking about mercy, how it can feel like a gift or a sentence depending on who offers it, how sometimes forgiveness has more teeth than punishment, and how strange it is to live in a world where sorrow must be beautiful to be believed. Part 11. You've seen people punished alone, publicly, even poetically, but today it's a couple, together, side by side, which somehow makes it worse. You arrive late to the square, breathless, and spot them immediately. Jorin and Matilda, the miller's son and the widow from 2 farms over. Married, yes, but not to each other. Oops. They're standing before the town bailiff like 2 poorly behaved schoolchildren, neither tied up, not yet, just standing uncomfortably, waiting for the sentence to drop like a thunderclap. Adultery, the bailiff says loudly, for anyone who hasn't been reading the town grapevine. Between a married woman and a married man, in direct defiance of holy sacrament, repeatedly, witnessed. That last word hits like a stone to the ribs, witnessed, and that's how you know it's serious. Someone saw them, possibly multiple someones, possibly with enthusiastic detail. The crowd buzzes, half anticipation, half schadenfreude. You slide between 2 barrel-bellied butchers, nod respectfully, and settle in. Today's punishment? A joint flogging. Yes, together, simultaneous, romantic, in a let's ruin our lives forever kind of way. Their arms are tied behind their backs. They're positioned near the whipping post, not touching, but close. Matilda glances at Jorin. He gives her the faintest nod, the kind of nod that says, well, this is happening. And then the whips begin. 2 lashes, 1 on each back, a synchronized, awful rhythm. Jorin winces, Matilda gasps. Neither screams. That would give the crowd too much. They hold it together, for now. This wasn't always the standard response. In some regions, adultery meant death, in others, exile, but increasingly towns across Europe favored public corporal punishment because it made a point without creating martyrs, pain, not silence, shame, not sainthood, and sometimes it was done together, to humiliate the couple, to sour the love, to say, this union has no warmth, only welts. Historians still debate whether flogging as a pair was meant to preserve the bond. If you suffer together, you might atone together, or to break it. Most agree it was about the spectacle. Punishment was always more effective when it looked like theatre. You watch as Matilda stumbles slightly, knees dipping. Jorin moves instinctively, trying to support her. The bailiff barks, "No touching!" A child giggles, a dog howls. Life continues, utterly indifferent. 10 lashes in, their tunics are torn at the back and the skin beneath is raw. Still they endure, because that's the game. If you flinch, you're weak. If you cry, you're guilty. If you faint, well, then you're everywhere's gossip by sunset. And yet, despite the blood and pain, there's something strange in the air. Defiance, not anger, not pleading, just the calm certainty of 2 people who have already lost everything but each other. When the final lashes land, the bailiff declares their punishment complete. "Let them walk the full circle of the square," he announces, so that all may see what betrayal looks like. You watch them walk, side by side, backs bleeding, heads high. They don't speak, but they don't separate either. People stare, a few spit, a few look away. You look at them, because for all the humiliation or the punishment, something in them hasn't broken. Not yet. And maybe that's the point. Not the pain, not the blood, but the bond that survives both. You remember a case from Bruges written down in smudged ink in a church record. 2 lovers flogged together and then made to sleep chained in the market square for 3 nights. They never married their original spouses again, but they did marry each other, moved to Ghent, opened a bakery, sold very popular pies. The church called it scandal, the village called it love. You trail behind Jorin and Matilda as they finish their circle. The crowd thins, the whispers linger. At the square's edge, someone unties their wrists.
They don't run.
They walk out of the square, past the butcher, past the gaping onlookers, past you.
Where they go next is anyone's guess. Maybe exile, maybe forgiveness.
Maybe another village entirely, where no one knows their names, their bruises, or their crimes. You pull your cloak tighter, the wind has picked up. A few leaves scatter across the stones like secrets let loose. Did you know that in 13th century France, some villages allowed adulterous couples to redeem themselves if they agreed to remarry each other after the punishment? Start over. Public sins, private promises, a strange sort of mercy. You don't know if that's what Jorin and Matilda will do. You don't know if they even can. But you hope, quietly, foolishly, that maybe they'll bake pies. Part 12. There's a saying in town, old, crusty, and repeated far too often. Gold buys silence faster than guilt earns forgiveness. You've never taken it too seriously.
Until today.
You're standing outside the estate of Countess Ameline, and the gates are already open. That alone is unusual. Nobility tends to keep their fences high, their secrets hidden, and their scandals handled. But word travels, and this word is especially juicy. Countess Ameline has been caught. Not just whispered about, not just rumoured. Caught, as in mid-morning, mid-bed, mid-oops. Her husband had returned early from a hunting trip and found a troubadour, yes, a troubadour, in his chambers, tuning more than his lute. By rights, this should be an execution.
Or at least a branding, or exile, something gruesome. Instead,
she's drinking wine on the terrace. You blink, adjust your cloak, squint. But there she is, draped in silk, back straight, head high, sipping red wine from a cup more expensive than your entire home. Her husband, Count Theodoric, is pacing inside. You see him through the stained glass window, gesturing wildly, red-faced, flanked by 2 priests and one very uncomfortable-looking scribe.
Ameline doesn't flinch.
Why? Because Ameline is wealthy, and in the medieval world, wealth doesn't just buy land or silk, it buys options.
There's a rustle beside you. 2 women are whispering.
She paid the bishop, one says. No, bribed the steward, he buried the letter. Both are probably true, because noble women, while still bound by the laws of the land and the whims of their husbands, also had loopholes. And if they had enough coin, charm, or leverage, those loopholes could be stretched until they became exits. It wasn't always so. In many places, adultery by a noblewoman was considered a threat to inheritance. A count might tolerate infidelity from a servant, but not from someone who could potentially birth a non-heir into his estate. Still, history is messy. Punishments for noble adulterers ranged from quiet annulments to locked towers, and in rare cases, if the woman was politically powerful enough, nothing at all.
And that seems to be the case here.
A servant passes by carrying a tray of figs and almonds. You blink again. This does not feel like justice. It feels like brunch.
Eventually, the priests exit the hall, their faces neutral, too neutral. That's a face you wear when you've been paid not to remember anything.
Count Theodoric follows behind them. He looks defeated. Not humiliated, just tired, like a man who expected justice and got accounting instead. And then, for the final act, he sits beside her. He does not yell. He does not touch her. He simply raises a glass of wine, drinks.
And that's that.
You stare. The crowd murmurs, unsure what to make of this conclusion. It's not loud enough to be scandal, not painful enough to be punishment.
It's just a business arrangement in fancy clothes.
And maybe it always was. You remember a case in 15th century Aragon where a duchess, caught in a years-long affair, sued her husband for slander when he dared speak about it. She won. She won. Historians still argue over whether this was an anomaly or a sign of how deeply entangled nobility was in its own web of discretion and denial. Here's the thing no one says out loud. For the rich, adultery isn't a sin, it's a calculation. Can you afford to get caught? Can you afford to not care? As the sun slides over the terrace, Ameline meets your gaze, just for a second. Her lips curve into the faintest smile, not cruel, not warm, just aware. You look away first. You walk back through the village, past the market where Carmen once wore the shame mask, past the whipping post where Jorin and Matilda bled, past the chapel where Mirella begged for forgiveness. And you realize something. The punishment for adultery is not about the sin, it's about the price. And who's expected to pay? Part 13. The thing about rules is, people will always try to outsmart them, especially when those rules involve getting flogged, branded, or forced to wear iron pig snouts in front of your in-laws. Today, you're headed toward the magistrate's hall, not for a sentencing, but for a petition, which in most villages is just a fancy way of saying legal loophole request. But in this case, it's far more entertaining. You spot the petitioner right away, Brother Renaud, a clergyman with a suspiciously good jawline and a record of confessing more than his parishioners. He stands beside Lady Blanche, who, despite her noble blood and mild expression, has recently caused considerable disruption to her husband's political alliances by spending a few too many evenings in Brother Renaud's library. Reading, of course. A few villagers chuckle as they gather, sensing this might be one of those unofficial holidays where the bureaucracy briefly becomes a comedy show. Lady Blanche steps forward first. She's dressed impeccably, too fine for market, not fine enough for court. Perfect scandal attire. Your Honour, she says with an elegant bow, I come not to deny but to clarify. Excellent start. She goes on to explain that her husband, Sir Geoffroy, has not touched her in over 4 years, that he has in fact declared her barren despite fathering several children by maids, goats, or possibly strong breezes. There are polite gasps from the audience. One man nearly chokes on a baked pear. Blanche continues, and therefore any alleged indiscretion with the brother here, she gestures to Renaud, who tries to look priestly and not blushing, was not a betrayal of marriage, but a pursuit of comfort in abandonment. Renaud chimes in, and I was offering spiritual guidance.
Of course he was.
The judge rubs his temples. He's heard worse. Here's the interesting bit. Blanche presents a document. It's been drawn up by a canon lawyer, citing a precedent from Avignon in which a wife, neglected beyond the natural calendar of the marriage bed, was allowed to seek annulment on grounds of emotional exile. You can feel the crowd lean in. This is better than mystery plays and cheaper than ale. But it's not just courtroom drama. This is how people survived. Not everyone could afford to buy their way out like Countess Ameline, but if you were clever, if you knew the system, you could dance between the lines. One documented case from 14th century Bologna shows a woman successfully arguing that her husband's repeated absence for war and his refusal to write letters constituted intentional emotional desertion. She got her annulment. Married a wine merchant, lived, as far as anyone could tell, happily. Could. Historians still debate how often people actually escaped punishment this way. Were these stories outliers, clever manipulations, or evidence that medieval law, for all its fire and blood, still left little cracks for clever feet? The magistrate looks over the scroll. So, he says slowly, You are not denying the affair. No, Blanche says, head high. I am asserting that my marriage had already dissolved in spirit, if not yet in parchment. Renaud adds, and I deeply regret the spiritual positioning of said events. The crowd loses it. The judge coughs. Very well, he says, rolling the scroll back up. Lady Blanche, you are hereby summoned to a tribunal. The court shall consider your husband's neglect in light of your, pastoral support. Translation. This is going to take weeks, but no one's getting branded today. Blanche curtsies like a queen. Renaud gives the sign of the cross, slightly crooked. The crowd disperses, muttering and grinning. As you walk back, you can't help but admire the artistry. Adultery in its raw form is just desire. But what you saw today, that was strategy. You pass the inn where someone has painted a heart pierced by a quill above the door. Probably meant to be romantic. Accidentally prophetic. Because people like Blanche and Renaud don't get caught by lust. They get caught by paperwork. Did you know, by the way, that in 15th century London, it was technically legal to seek annulment on grounds of permanent melancholy if your spouse refused physical affection and proper conversation? Imagine filing for divorce because your husband was boring, progressive and petty, two of your favorite things. You reach your door and pause, listening to the rustle of parchment still echoing in your thoughts. Sometimes the punishment for adultery isn't pain. Sometimes it's bureaucracy. And if you're lucky, it's just annoying. Rain again. Cold, steady, spiteful rain. The kind that soaks into your bones and makes even good choices feel damp with regret. You pull your cloak tighter and duck beneath the eaves of the chapel, the doors ajar, the candles inside flickering like nervous secrets. But you're not here for prayer today. You're here for absence. See, no one's being flogged this morning. No shame mask. No procession of penitent lovers. What's got people whispering isn't who's being punished, it's who isn't. Two people are missing. Their names, Elric and Marta. You know them. Not well, but enough. He was a parchment maker. She sold herbs. Both married. Both not to each other. They had been seen chatting too long, walking too close, laughing too often. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew, and now suddenly gone. You lean against the chapel wall, listening to the baker's wife and a fishmonger whisper. They vanished before dawn, one says. Took nothing but what they wore. No cart, no horses, no bodies either. They nod grimly, as if agreeing that bodies would have made things simpler. Disappearing wasn't easy in the Middle Ages. You couldn't just hop a train or change your name and open a smoothie shop in Bruges. But it wasn't impossible, especially if you were desperate, or clever, or in love. You stroll toward Elric's workshop. It's closed, but you peek through the boards, empty. Even the drying lines have been cut. You find Marta's hut too, half-packed, candles still melted in the holders, but gone, like they meant to leave quickly, quietly. Here's the thing, for all the punishment and spectacle, the most effective escape from adultery wasn't penance or iron rods. It was vanishing, running away, becoming someone else. It happened more than you'd think. Some couples fled to the Holy Land pretending to be pilgrims. Others joined traveling fairs where sins were just stories told over cider. A few even crossed borders and forged marriage records, starting over like a goose molted clean. Historians still debate how often such escapes succeeded. Most agree that logistically it was difficult, but emotionally it was a kind of freedom rare in a world full of walls. You sit on a damp bench listening to the townsfolk debate. They'll be caught, someone says.
No, they won't, replies another. They had help. Someone left the gate unbarred.
You glance up.
That's new.
Because if someone helped them, a friend, a sibling, a sympathetic priest, that means the line between sin and salvation just got blurrier. Did you know, by the way, that in medieval Iceland, a woman could divorce her husband by simply standing at her threshold and declaring it 3 times in front of witnesses? No chase, no trial, just, I'm done. 3 times. And boom, freedom, Norse style. You think of Marta, of Elric, the way they might be walking now, cloaks pulled tight, feet blistered, hands brushing briefly as they leave everything behind.
You imagine them on the road. No destination, just away.
Away from shame, from law, from that insufferable man who always spat when he said sinner. And suddenly you realize something strange.
You're not mad. You're jealous.
Because while the rest of you stayed behind, soaked in fear and gossip and dogma, they left. They wrote their own ending. And what is adultery really if not the crime of wanting something that's already forbidden? You walk home slower than usual, the rain tapping your shoulders like a gentle scold. At the edge of the village you pause. A scrap of parchment flutters on a fence post. You step closer. It's blank, but folded neatly, like a message was once written, then erased. You smile, you leave it there. Some stories are better unfinished. It's the quiet that wakes you, not silence. There's always some clatter in a medieval town, chickens staging revolts, someone yelling at bread for being too hard, the endless sermon from the bell tower that insists you're probably going to hell. But today there's a different quiet, like a stage after the actors have bowed and left, like a page waiting for the final word. You sit on your doorstep, watching the mist curl between rooftops. The gallows are empty, the stocks are clean, the shame mask rusts gently on its peg in the magistrate's hall. No one is crying, no one is confessing. For the first time in what feels like forever, a thing is happening, and it feels wrong. Then you hear it. A murmur near the tavern, hushed but urgent. You follow it, not even pretending to mind your own business anymore. You're deep in this now, every scandal, every flogging, every whispered escape. You've earned your front row seat. A scribe is standing on a crate, reading a decree with the self-importance of someone whose quill has never known humility. Henceforth, he declares, minor offences of adultery shall be handled within the family, not by public justice. The Church will no longer administer physical punishment for first-time infractions. A pause. Repeat offences will be met with prayer and penance. A bigger pause. And no woman shall be branded unless her husband requests it twice. The crowd doesn't cheer. No one claps. This is not a victory parade, but you feel it, slowly soaking into the bones of the town like spring thaw. Change. Small, unsure, probably temporary, but change. People begin to murmur. Some scoff, others blink like they're waking from a long dream full of iron and mud. You look at the baker's wife. She's not smiling, but she isn't frowning either. You think that might be hope. You drift toward the chapel. The door is open. Inside, the candles burn a little lower than usual. Father Theobald is there, arranging books, talking softly, to no one. He glances at you, then says something unexpected. Mercy costs more than blood, but it leaves fewer stains. He turns back to his books. You step out. The world isn't suddenly just or fair. It's still built from rules written by men with ink-stained hands and twitchy guilt reflexes. But maybe we've moved an inch. Historians still debate what caused the shift. Was it theology, economics, a new bishop with fewer grudges? No one agrees, no one ever does. But something happened. The tide changed. And where once there was branding, now there's prayer. Where there was flogging, now, perhaps, a letter. You walk the edges of town remembering every story. Carmen in the shame mask, Aldrich and his donkey ride of doom, Beatrix barefoot and weeping beneath stained glass, Isabeau seared with a fleur-de-lis, Mirella begging under the window, Elric and Marta gone into myth. Each one carved a little line into the stone of this place, and now the stone is softening. Did you know, by the way, that in some later medieval cities, adultery was punished not with pain, but with pilgrimage? They'd send you away for a year. No branding, no stocks, just distance and reflection. You think about that a lot now. Distance, reflection.
Maybe it's not punishment that shapes people. Maybe it's what they do after.
You return home as dusk settles in, slow and honey-coloured. The square is empty. Even the gossips have run out of steam. You sit on your doorstep again, watching as one final candle flickers out across the way. And it's in that moment, brief, quiet, barely there, that you realize something simple. People sin. People forgive.
And people forget.
Not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, with enough time and less fire. You lean back, let the night fold over you.
No more iron, no more horns.
Just the sound of wind and stories being gently tucked away. And so you drift, listener, through the haze of centuries gone. The world of punishment and passion now dims like candlelight in a long stone hall. You've walked the muddy streets where sin was paraded, branded, mocked. You've heard the crack of the whip, the hiss of hot iron, the whisper of confessions under stained glass and moonlight. You've seen justice twisted, uneven, bruised by power and soothed by coin. But you've also seen mercy, clumsy, surprising, stubborn. A barefoot woman pleading beneath a window. A branded seamstress who didn't cry. A scorned husband who chose to kneel instead of condemn. The laughter, even in punishment. The tears that didn't mean shame, but memory. Each story a thread, each punishment a question, and each soul caught somewhere between desire and doctrine, between what they wanted and what the world would allow.
Now the square is silent. The shame masks rust. The donkeys sleep. The law has softened. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to let the next scandal unfold in private. Enough to let love, sin, and sorrow pass through back doors instead of public halls. And you're still here, listening, remembering.
Because the Middle Ages weren't only about fire and stone, they were about people, messy, beautiful, terrible people, just like now. So rest your eyes, gentle soul. Let the flicker fade, let the parchment curl, let the sins be forgotten, or at least forgiven. You've walked far enough. The story is over. The lights are out. Sleep now.